Well, welcome everyone to our lunchtime seminar. My name's Gary Taylor. I'm a board member of RiskNZ. Is that right there? Cool. Our lunchtime seminars remain one of our most popular events, bringing relevant speakers to our members and insights on risk topics within the space of an hour on the first Tuesday of most months. Before we start, I'd like to take the opportunity to acknowledge and thank our sponsors of RiskNZ, our premier sponsors, SAI Global, JLT and Paladin, and our key lunchtime seminar sponsors, Cybercraft and Safety Associates. I'd also like to acknowledge our lunchtime seminar supporters for our venues across the country, KPMG, Navigators Consulting, Christchurch City Council, and PowerCo. Today's lunchtime seminar has been delivered across 4 venues, Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch and New Plymouth, and connects a whole number of participants by webinar. We would like to request that all venues and participants keep themselves on mute. You can type questions into the webinar platform any time during the session, or you can hold them until the question and answer session. During our question time, we will start with the remote participants, then move across to the various venues, Auckland, Christchurch, New Plymouth, and then return to Wellington. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to Chris Nicholls, Director, Ascent Business Consulting. Chris is a director and an owner of it, and for 11 years in the consulting and contracting company, Ascent Business Consulting, that specialises in technical and project managers services. For the last 15 years, he has provided advice and guidance to a wide range of organisations to help them make strategic decisions based on sound business cases. Chris's skills and achievements in the consulting area include investment risk management, business continuity planning, project financial controls and project governance, feasibility study and business case report writing, benefit mapping and benefit management plans, and successful crowdfunding requests totaling over 150 million in the last 6 years. As part of the investment risk management, Chris has performed a number of quantitative risk assessments covering both large-scale ICT and property investments and the stand-up of new services. More recently, he has begun using his experience as QRAs to train EPMO and finance teams who are seeking to manage their organisation's investments risk more effectively. Chris, we look forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. Hello, everybody. So I'll jump straight into it and I'll point this at something. I can just do the keyboard if it's easier. Don't have a button to press. There we go. That's good. Which is the magic button. That's the magic button. Thank you. Excellent. So, so today we're going to talk about a quantitative risk assessment. What is it? Why would you do one? When would you do one? And how could you do one? So this it's a relatively high level presentation, and I've kind of aimed it more at the kind of the management layer, just at a high level overview. So hopefully that's it pitched at the right level for you guys. So jumping across, what is a QRA? It's a measurable, objective use of the measurable objective data to determine asset value, the probability of loss, and associated risks. So that I've stolen that from a business dictionary. The New Zealand government have a definition for it as well, and it's saying it's a modelling technique that makes risks and the financial impact of those risks more explicit to decision makers when considering a business case. So Treasury, within their business case process, if it's a risky enough investment, and they want us to go through this process. So it's quite important. Treasury recognise the value of it, and they like to see it as sort of a hygiene factor, and also it actually adds a lot of value to a business case, because it gives you, the investor, a good sense of what uncertainty you've got around your investment. So in terms of what it can do, or what it is, it's helping us to figure out if something might cost more than expected, that something might take longer than expected, or it might have less benefits than expected, or some combination of all of those factors. Obviously, risk can go both ways. Maybe the costs might be less than what you thought, which is a good thing generally. Benefits might be higher. So what we end up doing is creating distributions of uncertainty around all those different things. So why would you use a QRA? So the main thing is, and this is backed up by Treasury's, the government's view, is that they want greater assurance that the things we're doing as agencies, or just even if you're a private sector organisation, the board would like assurance that this particular investment that you're doing is not going to cost. You can have some level of certainty that it won't cost more than a certain amount of money. So this classic scenario where a project will come along and say it's going to cost $50 million, but how certain are you around that $50 million? And then this process will enable you to say, well, I can be 80% sure that it won't be more than $65 million. As an give people some assurance about what the total cost envelope is. What it also does is it gives you a line of sight between your input assumptions and how those input assumptions are driving your uncertainties. So you might have a cost per square metre or per cubic metre of concrete, or you might have a labour rate or a estimated number of hours for a project. And if you're not 100% sure that's truly what it's going to take, then this model will enable you to get some sense of, if my input hours change from 100 hours to say 120 hours, what impact is that going to have on my outcome, both in terms of duration and cost. The other good thing about the QRA is that if you're managing at an enterprise level, if you're managing your risk, your investment risk, across a portfolio of investments, I'm sure Department of Corrections won't mind me just mentioning this, but they, for example, have a lot of prisons, and they're extending their prisons at the moment. And so what they do is they've got contingency sitting across all those different projects. And if you sit on a 10% or a 20% contingency for a project, and you sit on that for the entire build, that's consuming a lot of capital resource, and it's taken away from the opportunity to use that money elsewhere in government, or indeed elsewhere around the corrections investment pool. So what this does is it enables you to manage at an enterprise level your contingency, and as you go through a project, your cost to complete can be iterated through, and you can fine tune that so your contingency is reduced, and that can be given back to the pool. So that's a useful thing, and in fact that's the primary reason I'm helping corrections at the moment, is to look at that enterprise pool of risk. Generally, why would you use a QRA? Generally, it's better than just having a punt. So that's my last point there, is that often we would pre-QRA we'd just say, it's probably about 10% more, and that'll give us an idea, sort of put an up and down to it, but you really just don't know that until you go through all of your analysis of your input assumptions and you figure out how sensitive the model is to those input assumptions. So when would you use a QRA? Just about any time you're going to put some money down. You can do it into any industry. I've ended up using QRAs across mostly property and ICT investments and large programs of work where duration is important. It's scalable though, so you could do it for smaller scale investments. Having said that, when it becomes a smaller investment, that's not going to hurt you so much if you blow out on your costs. So it's generally the bigger ones. Treasury, I think, might correct me if I'm wrong, but it's still mandatory as part of the detailed business case for significant projects. So it's actually a formal requirement from the government process. How does it work? In pictures, you may identify a risk, and so just in picture format, say for example, you've got a lovely beach house that's sitting on the beach, and there's a chance that you might have a big wave. You don't know when that wave might arrive, but there is a chance that that wave may arrive. So when it arrives, how far up the beach is it going to go? How fast is it traveling? And that's sort of and the impact that it hits your house. There's a probability equation that you can build around that. So the speed of the wave, the height of the wave, how fast it hits your house. Then there's the house itself. So how strong, how robust, and is that house? So can it withstand the shock of that wave up to a certain point? And over that point, maybe it can't stand it. It's going to get a few cracks. And if the wave hits really hard, it's going to do a lot of damage. So what's the equation of the house? What's the resiliency of the house? And combining those, the dice throw is the concept behind Monte Carlo analysis, is where you run iterations. You create the probability of this wave hitting. You have the house, the value of the house, and the probability of that wave hitting the house, and you simulate that as many times as you like. So the beauty of a PC is you can set that up, a machine, you can set it up to run thousands of times. So in my QRAs, I run maybe 5,000 iterations just to get myself a nice probability curve. And the dollar impact. So the value of that house, what's the cost of the rebuild? So yeah, that's I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I'll go to Mike, because Mike's a leader in this space, and I've learned quite a lot from him over the years. But conceptually, that's how I think about a QRA. So in practical terms, what I do is for every input that I've got in my financial model, I end up creating a probability distribution around each of the key input risks to my financial model. So I've got a bit of an example coming up, but and I'll elaborate on it. But say you might be forecasting the cost of a hotel, and the rooms haven't been fully designed. You've got a space, you've got an air gap, and you're not quite sure from the architects how many rooms you can cram into that hotel. So you might have 100 rooms, but you might be able to get 120 rooms, or might only be able to get 80 rooms. So there's some sort of a distribution around that that you can create, which will give you a sense when you feed that into your model, and if you sampling from that distribution thousands of times, it'll give you a sense of how much your costs are going to vary. Because obviously, if you could put more rooms in, it may be that's going to cost more money. It's likely that that's going to cost more money. So the Monte Carlo simulation is a process of repeated statistical sampling using the probability distributions that I've created for all my different inputs. I use a special software tool for that. And then when I've run my model, I've got some probability density functions for my outcomes. So I oftentimes we want to track what our one-time costs are, what the longer-term annual operating costs are, and also whole-of-life costs. Those are key metrics that come out of my model, and that can inform a business case. So here's a picture version of that. So I've got an input assumption, and I typically use triangles because they're just easier for people to get their heads around. There's lots and lots of different ways that you can model distributions, but in this left-hand side of the screen, the triangle I'm talking to here is, say, you might say that the midpoint is 14, and that's what I'm expecting to get. Just in this particular example, might be 14. I don't know. That's dollars an hour. I'm going to pay a labourer. It might be $14 an hour, but I might be able to get the labourer. Optimistically, I might be able to get that labourer for $9. Pessimistically, if the labour rates shoot up and people disappear and I've got to pay overtime or contract rates, I might have to pay $30 an hour for that labourer. So that's kind of it's an uncertainty around a labour rate, for example. I put all those things through my Monte Carlo analysis in the middle, crunches it out, and then on the right-hand side, you'll see there's examples of some outputs that the model can push out. So the top one is gives you a sense of how sensitive the outputs are. So you might monitor a particular output like your one-time costs, and those bars will give you a sense of what the one-time costs are most sensitive to. So the top bar, for example, might be the labour rate, and so if the labour rate was low, it's going to have a really big impact and it'll be favourable, and if it's high, it'll have a big impact and it'll be unfavourable. So it's called a tornado diagram, and it's giving you a sense of how sensitive your model is to those inputs and their uncertainty. And then you can also create distributions. So the bottom right-hand figure is a cumulative. Well, there's a normal distribution there, and then there's a cumulative probability curve. So at the 50th percentile, you can say, I think my project's going to cost $100 million, and then you keep going up to say 80%, and you can say, but I'm 80% sure that it won't cost more than $120 million, and then it gives you your contingency loading. And generally, what happens with governance, project governance, is that the CE, for example, might be given the $100 million, but the board holds that extra $20 million in contingency, and they give it to the CE if it's required, if some of those risks eventuate. And we're going for time. 10 more minutes. So here's an illustrative example. The hotel. I built a model around that, which is a 10-year cash flow. I've got costs in there. Say, for example, cost per cubic metre of concrete. How many square metres do I need per room? How many beds do I need? All that sort of stuff, and it's going to give me a one-time cost view. So then and this is a really important step actually. So what you've got then is a series of key input assumptions that you've got a good feeling that this is what the model's most sensitive to, and you've really got to sit down with the right stakeholders in the room, and this is a really important step, is getting the right people in the room to actually talk about what is the uncertainty around those input assumptions and creating those distributions. Because I can just sit away in a box and do that all myself and come up with some distributions, but typically for the best results, you're going to need a combination of like the architect, and if that's IT, that's an enterprise architect. If it's building, it's an architect, quantity surveyor. Some of the bigger, more crunchy assumptions will be covered off by like what's happening to the industry, what's happening in your agency, what are the political risks. So you want some senior managers in the room as well, just to sort of have that coming through into the workshop. So we create those distributions around those uncertainties, input risks, and then we run the model. So the Monte Carlo analysis using special software, and then we report. Input ranges, here's an example. So the room size, and this is an example of different distributions that you could create that would then go into your model. So I've got a call out there. I've created a triangle around the number of beds. I've said my project estimate is estimating 700 beds for this hotel. It might only be 600, but it might be 1,000. So that's kind of what you would do at your workshop. But if you put that into the at-risk tool, it'll say that it'll tend to push the expected slightly higher than 700. So it'll push it up there. And I'll talk to that in a second, because that what you've got there is a classic situation where the project has estimated something, and that's what they're pretty sure is going to happen. But once you get people around the room, you realise that that risk is it's not a balanced risk, and you end up the project. There's an optimism bias going on in the project where people are thinking it's going to only be a number, but once you get enough people in the room and you realise there's a bit of an upside risk to that. So you're what we're calling P50, the 50th. Is that what I say? The 50th percentile. So it's that your 50% chance that in this example I've just been talking about the hotel. It might cost you 75 million. I'll go through run the model, and then at P85, which is 85% sure it won't be more than 115 million. So that's going to give me 55% contingency, which is a really big range, but you might be early on, you might be sort of at pre-design phase for this to have such a big range. So in this example, if say the project estimate was closer to 50 million, then you've got an optimism bias going on, and the QRA is really good at pulling this sort of stuff out of the woodwork. You see it all the time with projects that are really optimistic, they're going to get this done, it's only going to cost 50 million bucks, and you go through this process and suddenly they're all realising that there's a whole lot of risk dropping out of the woodwork, and actually it's probably going to cost 75 million bucks, and then your stakeholders, your investors can see that there's a nice clean line of sight as to how that's happened, and they have more confidence in your investment, and your business case has got a greater chance of being approved. So observations from my experience is you've got to get the right people in the room to establish what those risks and uncertainties are. You've got to focus on the assumptions that matter, and the tool will help you do that. You can run a couple of iterations where you'll find the biggest risks, and then you might even be able to break those down into more detailed assumptions that are sitting behind that risk to help tease out what's going on. What to do when project estimates are different. So that's what I was just alluding to before, when you've got optimism bias in the team and you've got to talk them back, you've got to talk them up from say 50 million to 75 million. Sometimes they don't want to do that because they've already set expectations with the minister. And that's always painful. And then the value of an independent QRA. So I've sort of done it both ways now, and I think on balance it's more valuable to have an independent QRA. I've done a lot where I've been involved in a project and there's some expectations have been set, and then we've run the QRA model and we've had our workshops and we haven't quite fitted into the expectations that was set. So there's a lot of pressure put on me as the financial analyst who's also run a QRA, try and make it fit, which kind of messes up the whole concept of managing your risk properly, because you're sort of pushing it down and to get it through. So there's a little bit of a trade-off there around being in the team and there's sort of adding that to it as a skill set versus dropping into a project and advising and doing your bit and then walking out again. Effort required, just top of head stuff. For me personally, it takes me maybe 3 to 5 days to go in, I review the material. If I need to, I'll take the financial analyst's model and I'll build a really simple model that just on a page that just focuses on key risks and it still is calibrated to the main model. And then we have a workshop around that. And then it's sort of a day of just iterating with the client and writing up the report. So yeah, anywhere between 3 and 5 days to do a $80 to $100 million investment QRA process. That's me. Thanks very much, everybody. Time to good.
Thanks, Chris.
Okay.
We'll now open up for questions. We'll go please from
Yes. Yep. No. All right, Q&A. So if you'd like to read out the question from the Q&A and then answer it.
Well, okay, here it is from Ben. Why do you think people shy away from a quantitative risk assessment and prefer qualitative? Quantitative assessment can have the same or less uncertainty than qualitative. So Same old essence, quantitative. Why do people shy away from qualitative? So I find that, so in a business case, when you're doing your options analysis, you'll tend to do a number of things. Like you'll look at, you use a multi-criteria analysis, and often you'll assess options against the investment objectives that you've done in your investment logic map, your critical success factors, which is the standard treasury out of the box. You know, is it doable? Is it in line with strategy? What's my risk profile? All those sorts of things, and those tend to be the more qualitative assessments. So those are, in my experience anyway, just doing a classic business case process. Those are done as well as a quantitative risk assessment. I don't think people shy away from quantitative risk assessments as such, but there is, I think, there's an awareness gap about the usefulness of it. So, or maybe it's just driven by a lack of understanding, because it's a bit of a black art, and there is some special software, and it's kind of a bit hard to get your head around. So people might not necessarily think about it if they didn't know it was an option to help them. Not sure that answers the question, but yeah. Any other questions? Good.
Auckland, do you have any questions? Okay. Christchurch, do you have any questions? No? Can you hear us?
Give us something. Give us anything.
Anybody?
No questions from Christchurch. We're having audio problems here today, unfortunately.
Okay, no questions from Christchurch. Let's go down to New Plymouth. Do you have any questions?
I don't think we had any questions. Thanks for the presentation today. Cheers.
Thanks, Toby.
Pleasure.
Can't seem to get Auckland. Are you there? Auckland? Right, we might as well go to Wellington. Wellington, any questions?
Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah. So what it's trying to do, it's the one I use is called a Spamman Rank, and what it's trying to do is say, if I've got like 10 input assumptions, it's trying to rank which of those assumptions has the most impact on the output that I'm looking at. So if I'm monitoring one-time cost, for example, and cost is like, say, cost is a really simple equation, like it's my labour rate times my hours times the duration. So I might do 100 hours in a month, and it's $10, and I'm going to go for 7 months. So then I've got three things that I'm unsure about there. I'm unsure about my labour rate, the duration, the number of hours per month, and the number of months. And then I'll put uncertainty distributions around each of those things, and we'll talk about it as a team, and the team will go, oh, well, the project might be finished in 6 months, but actually there's a risk that something could come through. We're going to have to keep that project burning because it's really important, and it could take 15 months as an extreme example. So suddenly the month's duration becomes really important. So when I do that tornado diagram after having run the Monte Carlo, it'll say month's duration is really, really important. It'll have a really long bar to say it's going to have the most impact. And then the next one down might be labour rate, and the next one down might be hours per month, or something like that, depending on how the uncertainty we've put around each of those distributions. Yeah, you'll sit around as a group, a collective group of wise people, and you'll say, okay, well, the project's come to us and they've said that they think it's 7 months, and then we'll dig into that and say, well, show us the plan. Okay, well, there's a plan. It's not a very good plan. What are the risks around that plan? What could happen? And then we look at it some more. And you might spend, some of these risks, you might spend 20 minutes to an hour. A big risk like that, you're going to have a big chat about it. And if it's really uncertain, you'll get the team to go away and fix that up and come back because it's not clear enough yet. So it just depends on the size and the impact that's going to have. Well, so you can sort of get pushed into a corner, and you've got to pay. It's a bit of a balancing act between, especially my role as a consultant, because I like to be fed. So you've got to help them build the financial model, and you're doing all your options and that, and then that's where I was talking about the trade-off between just putting that on top as a part of one of my deliverables for the team, or getting someone external in, like a Mike or me in an external sense to come in and actually do it as a fresh set of eyes. And we're not so wedded to, oh, will I keep my job next month or not? So it's tricky.
Chris, if your team of wise people
Yeah.
still can't come to every single way, can you use this tool to actually try and help them come to clarity? Like, could you actually just put it in and actually run?
Yeah.
So that it's
It's an enlightenment.
Kind of
Yeah.
Going, maybe we are still being optimistic, like
Yeah.
help in that conversation.
Yeah.
That no one really has any idea at all. Are you able to use the model tool, even with just some very broad brush assumptions, a label, enable people to help them narrow their decision making or not?
I do think that helps. You do have to be careful. But it can help, like, to do an iteration. Like you don't want to be having a complete guess, because then that's basically signalling to me that we don't know what we're doing. So that's not so good. But if you're directionally correct, and then you start having a conversation at least about what the uncertainties are and the parameters are around that, you can run an iteration through the model, and then you can see, oh my goodness, it's driving all the risk, and then try to nail what is sitting behind that. Yeah.
One of the techniques that I use, and Chris knows, seeing me use this, is to push people to the extremes. So if you're talking about labour rates, for example, say, well, what about $200 now? And you push them to the extreme where they say, no, that couldn't possibly go through that high. So that's a piece of information.
Yeah, that's parameterized then, isn't it?
Yeah.
You can sort of,
Yeah.
Any other questions from Wellington?
How often would you rerun modelling?
Yeah. Good question. So one of my projects I did was years ago. I was doing it for DIA for the National Library, and so they would get me to do cost to complete. I call it QRA for the building for cost to complete, and it was coming in every couple of months, maybe, and as each time I came, they'd obviously spent more money. We're going through the curve, but the uncertainties were closing out as well. So some of the risks were dropping, and you could just see they were going from this much, and then over time it was dropping down to. So that was. Yeah, I just pulled out the same model. Pulled the same model. I updated. I overwrote a couple of months with actuals, and then reforecast what was happening. In combination with sort of that information about what was happening on the build. For things that like IT, interesting. I tend to sort of get this. IT ones are problematic, and I think we can always do better with IT projects. But it tends to be just sort of get them through the DBC hurdle, get their money, and then they sort of get cut loose on it, and go. So, but I think there's probably some scope for improvement there as well around tracking the specific risks that you've identified and seeing what's happening to that.
The challenge I'm finding with the IT projects now with QRA is that if you're using Agile Development, it really comes down to how many sprints.
Absolutely. So I just did some QRAs for land information, for example, and it's all Agile. It's the step. It's the land online thing, and it's a whole bunch of teams. There's up to 5 or 6 teams. What do you call them? Scrums, groups. And it's like what it all comes down to is scope and duration. Like how much can those people iterate through? You feed them stuff, and how much can they get through? Will they get through it in the time that you've given, or will they burn for longer? So yeah, that's the risk changes. The way what's happening to the shape of the program is different, but you still need to model the risks around that. Yeah.
I mean, the biggest impediment is still people not understanding what the risks are. You can't do quantitative analysis if people don't understand what the risks are.
Yeah.
So it's like any modelling technique, you put crap into it, you get crap out.
Yeah, and it's normally a warning sign if you go to a workshop and people don't really know what's going on. It's like, oh. Yeah.
Okay.
Here we go. Yeah.
Oh, okay. For triangular distributions, why do you estimate 10% and 90% not extremes? Yeah. Thanks. So just for people who can't hear, Mike from the audience, the 10th percentile and the 90th percentile will tend to give you a more accurate result, and it's also people can think that way. So if you say what's optimistically what could happen, you're probably going to get a better sense of that. But if you go to the extremes, they really are extremes. It's like a Christchurch earthquake event. It's an absolute extreme, and no one ever predicted it. So that's why I tend to do that. Next question. At an enterprise level, surely you cannot use quantification for all risks, or can you? Investment opportunity is ideal. What about brand damage, business model disruption, etc.? Your thoughts on strategic risk versus quantification, please. So enterprise level, there's strategy, and there's like, for example, corrections. They've got a strategy, I guess, and it's I actually don't know exactly what it is, but their strategy will be something along the lines of, we've got to make sure it's a safe and secure environment for the people that we're looking after, and they're going to need enough beds to create that environment. But when you get down to an investment level, that's where this stuff really adds value, because what they're doing is saying, okay, well, we're going to drop another 2,000 beds into this area, 2,000 beds into this area. What is my investment risk? So in that sense, when you're talking specifically about a project that's got tangible money flowing through your hands, I think that it's the right tool to use. Brand damage, I'm not quite sure what that question is alluding to. Sorry, was it sort of business model disruptions? Yeah, sorry, I'm not quite sure.
I suppose I think maybe there are some people apply this technique to something that's soft, i.e. not money invested in houses.
Yeah.
What is the value of reputation
Yeah.
brand?
Sure, you can model anything. Yeah.
February,
Yeah.
And how much February has become New Zealand's favourite chocolate manufacturer, it's now not.
Yeah.
Like,
Good example.
Can you hear us?
Yeah. I can just hear. Yeah. I can just hear you. Did you want to speak?
Hi there, Chris. This is Satya from Auckland. I'm glad we can finally get through. So we've got a few questions here. Ben, do you want to kick things off?
Yeah, sure. So look, what I was alluding to there is
I think you got it.
I think it's
Yeah.
there.
So guys, I can't hear you, but someone in the audience just helped me clarify your question, I think. So I'm going to have a crack at it. So can you model soft things like brand damage, brand impact on brand? And I would say yes, so long as you can value that. So if, say, for example, your brand was worth, your goodwill was worth $100 million, and then the impact of making bad chocolate, for example, for Cadbury, I'm sure you can construct some sort of an equation around that, and you can look at the uncertainties and then model that as an impact. If you can chuck it in Excel, you can create a risk profile around it.
Okay. Is there-
Do we have any further questions from Auckland? No. Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, I couldn't really hear you guys.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you, Chris, for your presentation and for giving us an overview and some of the insight of your experience like using applying QRA. And I'd like you, if you'd like to join me in thanking Chris.
Thanks, guys. That's very good.
Just before we finish, a couple of things I'd like to do. One is just want to give you a heads up about our next lunchtime seminar, and that's in August. We're having Giles Carter from Air New Zealand, who's going to be talking about organisations' implementation of crisis management principles. So that'll be very informative and interesting. And I'd just like to conclude by thanking our sponsors, JLT, SAI Global and Paladin, and our lunchtime sponsors of Cybercraft and Safety Associates, and our hosts, KPMG, Navigators Consulting, Christchurch City Council, and PowerCo. So thank you very much for coming along to today's session. We'll see you at the next one.
Okay.